In a leaked voice note that circulated on social media at the weekend, the Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, revealed that Nigeria was left with no choice than to redlist the United Kingdom, Canada, and Saudi Arabia, and ban flights from the three countries after they had imposed similar travel restrictions on Nigeria. The UK, Canada, and Saudi Arabia shut their doors to foreign travelers originating from Nigeria after cases of the Omicron COVID-19 variant were linked to travelers arriving from the West African country. The UK and Saudi Arabia also took their bans a step further by suspending the issuance of travel visas to Nigerian citizens, while Canada said it will not accept PCR tests from the country. All these actions coincided with the tit-for-tat that played out last week between Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates over the refusal by the Middle East country to grant 2 additional slots to Air Peace at the Sharjah airport in the UAE. This was despite the fact that the Nigerian authorities had granted 21 slots to Emirates Airline to fly in and out of the country. Now joining us to discuss the painful but necessary measures that Nigeria has been forced to take against the UK, Canada, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE is Alex Nwuba, President, Aircraft Owners Association of Nigeria, and former CEO of Associated Airlines. He'll also be talking to us about the impact of retaliatory strikes on the aviation sector, airline passengers, and the Nigerian economy as a whole. Welcome to the show, Alex. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for joining us. Rafai.
All right. Okay, so good morning once again. I'd just like to ask you, analyze this for us. What are the implications for this? Right move, obviously, but how is this going to go? How does this normally go?
Well, let's start with how did it all begin? Nigeria negotiates bilateral air service agreements with various countries. And so we make these one-to-one agreements that say we can come to your country so many times and you can come to us so many times. And that forms the basis of the way that airlines operate on the international scene. In the case of the UAE, Nigeria granted 21 flights into Nigeria, 2 daily to Lagos and 1 to Abuja, and granted itself 3 flights back to the UAE. So if you look at that proportion, we'd given up, it was a 7-to-1. You can come in 7 times for every one we come in. And that happened to be the case. And I guess we did that on the basis that we didn't believe we had a carrier to operate to that market, and which is not what happens typically. If you do the analysis and you make the decision that 24 flights are viable, in this case the 21.3, typically what people would do that know what they're doing would say, you take 12, I take 12, regardless of whether I have the planes to fly them. And what would happen is that you would fly your 12, and then I would trade my 12 to you. So you pay me a fee to use my 12. And so typically I would say $100 per passenger, you carry on my 12, and I don't have to operate but the country and some money. But what we did is we gave away 21 and decided to keep 3. And eventually, Air Peace decided to fly those routes and applied to fly them. And we must make a distinction. We use the word slots quite liberally, but what we agreed on are frequencies. So you can come 21 times. Let's assume a 21. You can come 21 times and I can go 21 times. And so I have that authorization to do that. But then when I actually want to fly, I have to apply to the airport that I'll be flying to. In this case, first of all, Air Peace applied to fly into Dubai, which is the more popular airport that is more resourceful. You can make better connections. You have better experience at the airport. And they were denied by the UAE. And were given the right to fly to Sharjah, which they did for some time. And then during COVID, they suspended those flights. And so the intention was to return to Dubai, obviously, but they were given the opportunity to go to Sharjah. And after much deliberation, according to the Air Peace letter, because Air Peace also wrote to the minister, the UAE said, we'll give you 3 flights. We're supposed to give you 3 flights, but we can only accommodate 1 because of something called slots. So the airport itself says, well, you want to come, but I can't accommodate you, but I'll accommodate you 1 flight. And so that's where the discrepancy comes in, is that, yes, we're authorized to come as many times as the agreement calls for, but the airport also has a right to determine what it can carry in terms of capacity. So it's on the basis of that capacity that it made the decision that Air Peace can come once. But that's disadvantageous because then the Emiratis can come to Nigeria 21 times and we can only go once. If you look at what economies operate on, which is balance of trade, we're basically at disadvantage because they can come 21 times. 21 times, if you assume 21 flights a week, which is 3 flights a day, times 365 days, carries about 450,000 passengers. At the typical fare, we're talking about $500 million trade to the UAE. One flight is only at 300 to 400 passengers. So when you multiply that, you see we are disadvantaged based on the economies of scale. So Nigeria was insisting on 3. They would not be granted those 3. And the Nigerian government decided, okay, if you will not grant us the 1, if you only grant us 1, we'll also grant you 1, which is essentially violation of the agreement that was in place. So the problem is it started at the initial stage in the type of agreement that we signed. Now, by extension, we're saying, okay, it affects other markets in the world. We're looking, you talked about the minister's speech when he talked about banning additional countries for banning Nigeria, but those are completely different cases. So we'll just take them one by one. One by one. First of all, we have a flawed bilateral agreement, which has led to the opportunity for a disadvantage to our economy. And so we have to rework those agreements. We have to go back to the bargaining table and say, based on experience, we need to solve those problems. So we have 2 issues. One is frequency, which is government to government. The other are slots, which is what the airports are able to support. Nigeria does not operate a slot system. So obviously, if you get your frequencies, you probably can fly as many times as you want. The UK has a slot system. The UAE has a slot system. So this is where that imbalance occurs.
Sorry.
All right. So I'd like to piggyback on what you said, the bilateral agreements.
Yes.
Because some watchers have also cited bilateral agreements with the UK.
Yes.
So the instance they gave is this. The UK has got 2 airlines, Virgin, British Airways flying into Nigeria. Nigeria has got none flying into the UK.
Yes.
So in fact, before this reciprocity, some watchers have said that's even a good way to be able to, red list the UK from coming here in the first place.
Right. No, again, the agreement is for 3 airlines. So Nigeria, the BASA, the bilateral agreement with the UK says 3 airlines can fly to Nigeria. And the Nigerian agreement says 3 airlines can also fly, 3 airlines can fly from Nigeria to the UK as well.
But none is flying out of Nigeria to the UK?
Because who has actually applied to fly to the UK is the question. Okay, and then when you do agree to fly, there are also tricks in the business that people need to be aware of, and that's the problem with negotiation. If we agree again on the frequencies with the UK at 3 flights, 3 airlines operating between the 2, and we don't address the other issue of slots, then if they grant us, if they say we have not restricted you from coming on the basis that you don't have the airlines to operate with, and if you choose to come, you can come, the airport will trip us up. Now, let's look at also from that point of view. Nigerian airports are owned by the government. UK airports are typically owned as private airports. So if you decide to go to the UK and the private airport says, well, I can't accommodate you, then you have that problem. So we really need to look at how we negotiate these agreements. In the case of the UAE, it's a government airline, government airport. And so we have the ability to demand that we be granted that permission to come in. Basically, it has to do with competitiveness. The UAE apparently seems to be giving itself an advantage with relation first to the agreement and also supporting a government airline to dominate that route. That's the anti-competitive nature of the arrangement. So in solving this problem, it's not necessarily from a standpoint of banning, but to examine the competitive arrangement. And there are courts that allow us to go and say, look, the action by the UAE is anti-competitive, and on the basis of fair trade, which is governed by trade organizations that are under the United Nations, we can demand access to not just these 3 flights, but 21 flights as well, whether we can operate them or not.
So, sorry, I'm feeling a little bit unwell, so
That's
it's taking me a
fine, sorry.
minute. So what you're saying is that it's probably going to end up in litigation rather than, the contents of the letter from Airpeace to our minister demanding an unreserved apology. You don't see it going that way. You think it might end up in court?
Well, it depends on what we choose to do. The voice of the minister says that we are going to carry out these actions that are necessary to maintain our national pride. That's the question. If you look today, Russia has 150,000 troops on the Ukrainian border. Does that mean they will attack Ukraine? So the minister, having said that, does not necessarily mean that we are going to go the ban route. It may be a threat to force the hands of these countries to look more favorably towards the relationships that exist between us. If you look at the UAE letter, for example, it talks about the general spirit of brotherliness that exists between Nigeria and the UAE. It also lays the framework of the relationship between the country. And they're saying on the basis of that, we should not fight with each other. And so at the end of the day, if we choose not to fight, which is the typical way, we will end up either in court or we'll solve this matter diplomatically.
All right, diplomatically, but we are being untwisted here.
Yes.
And I'll go back to the case of even the UK. And even with even slot allotments, even when you finally have a Nigerian carrier going into the UK, it's always to the second choice airport, Gatwick.
Yes.
I remember the case of Medview. When they were flying out of Nigeria, it was to Gatwick.
Same with Sharjah. It's a secondary airport.
It's always a secondary airport.
Right,
so
yes.
why is that always the case? Why is that British Airways will fly into our prime airports here, but we don't get that prime reciprocity and fly into Heathrow, for instance? That's one. Two, let's now talk about this Omicron variant ban. Reciprocity is coming as regards that. Now, Nigeria is saying, we'll ban the UK too because they've got a lot of cases of Omicron. In fact, they've got community spread bigger than the case in Nigeria.
Yes.
Valid?
Valid. And you see, the government has stood up, which is the right thing. And Nigerians are proud that the government has stood up. We have 15 cases of Omicron, you have over 150 cases in your market, and you ban us. And so the government has stood up and said that is not fair. Even the United States Secretary General has called it a form of apartheid, a form of segregation, racism, essentially. But if you look again, you see, we are dealing with really clever people, and we have to be really clever in dealing with them. They're saying their ban is temporary to give themselves time. They've stated it publicly. This ban is temporary to give ourselves time to analyze this variant as well as take measures to prevent its spread. And so we will take steps to end this at some point in the process. Even today, the British minister has stepped forward to say, we believe by the end of this week, the ban will end. Is that the time when we begin to ban them? Let me go back to the other issue. Even if they did grant us the slots, they're also very clever. I use example. When I ran the national carrier of the Republic of Benin, we got permission to fly to Paris. And so Air France was flying that route, and we were also flying that route. And when you landed, the dogs were waiting for you. You've all traveled. You've seen the experience. When you land there, policemen, security men, immigration officers, everybody checking you as you get off the airplane. There are dogs smelling you. They're following you all over the place. And when you see the way you're treated, you essentially say to yourself, let me do Air France rather than go through this harassment. So there are many mechanisms. If the agreement is right and we fix it, it's okay. Then we fix the slots, it's okay. There'll be other ways. It's just basically those governments are pushing to protect their own domestic carriers and bring the sales or the revenue advantage to themselves. And that's finally what the government of Nigeria is doing, is saying, what you do to us, we'll do to you very simply. And so we're arriving at that point, which is a good thing. It's demonstrating that we're actually a sovereign nation and we're entitled to the same benefits that others have in their market. So it is a good thing, and nobody's going to say the minister's steps are wrong. But the question is now, we say by tomorrow we effect a ban. Will we effect a ban today and unban by Friday or Saturday? That's why diplomacy at the end of the day will be best in this matter.
Well, is this not a form of diplomacy? Just being hardball, some more?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, because that letter, like what Rufai just said, the letter the Air Peace wrote, they did observe that foreign airlines get the red carpet treatment in Nigeria. That's their term,
right.
And whereas the opposite is not the case.
In their market, we don't get the red. I just described that.
Yes,
we get harassed,
mm-hmm.
we get harassed, we get disadvantaged, etc. Like you said, we get sent to secondary instead of primary airport. Again, government, as it's beginning to strengthen its position in terms of what it demands, should make these demands that these Nigerian carriers should be given preference the same way we give them here. So we should be given the rights to fly to Dubai, not Sharjah. We should go to Heathrow, not Gatwick. If we don't strengthen our position and the private airline goes to these negotiations by themselves, we'll never get the best for the nation. But the government itself has to step in and say, we are behind you and we're going to do what's best for our nation.
All right. I also want to come in there. You said, oh, these people are quite clever because they said the ban was to be able to reassess their situation. But are they really clever? Because really, how do you effect a ban when the disease has already hit community spread?
Yes.
Prior to the UK red list in Nigeria, the disease has already hit community spread and it had already started reproducing in the UK.
Right.
So it was an afterthought of just that very punitive measure and travel appetite.
But let's go back again. I always like to take a step back. Where did the Omicron variant come from? In the case of Botswana, they said it was brought in by foreign diplomats of European background without stating where those countries were. So clearly, it was not a problem that originated in Africa, more so a problem that originated in Nigeria. It is simply what we call aeropolitics. They found something to use as a basis to achieve a greater advantage for their domestic airlines. Our reaction should be to say, this is not right, as we have been saying, and that we need to do what is fairer. That's what nations do in diplomacy. Taking a ban approach, I mean, and as I said, we intend to ban, we haven't banned, so it's difficult to say what the outcome would be. And I cited that example of Russia and Ukraine. The Russian troops have amassed 150,000 soldiers. It's a negotiating position with respect to the issue of Euro expansion. So again, our threat to ban could be to say, we do not like what you're doing, it needs to be reversed, but we need to go further. We need to go back and look at these agreements we've signed for decades. Nigerian Airways of old history used to fly to Dubai. It was a much larger airline than Emirates at the time. Over time, we have degraded our capabilities based on the agreements we've been signing. So we need to go back and look at those agreements again. Agreements are not permanent. If you find they're not working for you, you call the other party, the counterparty to the table and say, this is not working for us. We're a lot smarter now. We will do commercial agreements that say, if I can't come because I don't have the airplanes, then I should earn something from doing that. But that calls to the next question. Even if we chose to do reciprocity 21 for 21, do we have the capacity? We talk about establishing a national airline.
At least we can keep it and sell it.
Absolutely. That's the whole of their commercial agreement. But the question is, beyond that, do we have the capacity? Are we also taking the measures within Nigeria to support the airlines to be able to tap into that opportunity? Clearly, there was an indication and understanding that the potential for 24 flights between Nigeria and the UAE, we're only asking for 3. Why are we not raising our capacity to take advantage of 12 or 13 or even 14? That should be where we should be looking at. Review the agreements and improve our capacity to take advantage of economic opportunities that are presented to us.
Which leads me to the next question.
Yes.
Air Nigeria, since we're talking about intangibles but fundamentals like national pride, our national carrier, do you think it's just some kind of pipe dream, or is it a necessity that we can actually get off the ground?
I've spoken about Nigeria Air, the national carrier project, and we have to look at Nigeria has quite a mature airline industry, unlike the UAE, unlike many other markets, I would say. And so we have airlines like Air Peace, Ibom Air, etc., etc. We should actually be strengthening the capacity of those airlines to be competitive on a global market than floating one airline that competes with the established marketplace. And that really should be the direction. One national carrier, the likes of Ethiopian or Emirates or British Airways is not even a national carrier. British Airways is a private airline operating as a flag carrier. And so if we designate some Nigerian carriers as flag carriers, they can actually perform that role. So really what we need to is expand our capacity, not just float one Nigeria Air. And then if you look at even the structure for the Nigeria Air, 51% Nigerian owned, 49% foreign interest. What if that foreign interest was UAE, for example, and we are faced with this kind of dilemma? How do we actually handle that? Do we say that we're working contrary to our interest or their interest or whose interest is at play? We use the example of Kenya Airways that was recently managed by KLM. Was it successful? No, it wasn't. They're back to running Kenya Airways as a national carrier. So if we choose to go the national carrier way, the model is even wrong to start with. And even when we discard that model, nobody knows what the model is. It's 5% owned by the government, obviously 45% by somebody else that is undefined at this point, and 49% foreign. If that 49% is the majority because the Nigerian end is already 45%, they will call the shots. Who is that? British Airways? Is it Ethiopian Airlines? Is it Egypt Air? So the National Carrier Project is a very long and drawn-out conversation. It's possible if we choose to do it, but I don't think it's in the best interest of our country as we talk about what's in the best interest of our country at this time.
So how do we strengthen local airlines, that albeit they can be flag carriers,
right?
They can't compete effectively on the global scene. As we all know, the national carrier thing doesn't work. We remember our case with Virgin Nigeria.
Correct.
That's a clear example of how this doesn't work in the end. Once Richard Branson pulled out of it, it was a cookie waiting to crumble in the end.
Right.
And it became Air Nigeria at that time, I remember.
Right, yes.
And before it finally packed up. So how do we strengthen local airlines? How do we put airlines like Air Peace, Ibom Air in that stead to be able to make incursions into the big market? Because you see, it's always the way the airlines are run. I talked about Medview. Medview used to go into the UK, was the only Nigerian airline I know was going to the UK. Today, I'm not sure Medview still exists. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
So how do we strengthen? Arik too used to go at a point.
Yes.
We all know what happened to Arik.
Right.
So how do we strengthen these airlines?
The way we strengthen Nigerian airlines is capital. The biggest challenge facing Nigerian airlines is capital. If the airlines borrow money from banks to support their operations, they're borrowing at double digits, 18 to 20%, whereas European airlines are borrowing at 1 or 2 or 3%. And so on a competitive basis, if you look at what's the profit level, airlines are running a profit level of 3 to 4 or 5%. And so if you're borrowing at 22%, it creates a disadvantage for us. We've called on the minister to say, look, what the airlines need is the nation Nigeria to access its sovereign credit, to raise lower interest funds that will buy equipment to equip Nigerian airlines and support their growth. Also, Nigerian airlines, and even in their structure, should be modified to trade more as public utilities or public companies in that sense, so that we solve the other issue, which is the governance issue, how these airlines are run as entities. So if we address the issue of governance and address the issue of capital, Nigerian airlines will be strengthened, they'll become competitive globally, we'll be able to take on the likes of Ethiopian in Africa, the likes of Kenya in Africa, and the likes of Egypt Air. So basically, capital is the challenge. If we government itself would address that capital challenge through innovative projects such as what they call the National Leasing Program, the project for a National Maintenance Center, which prevents the outflow of capital for maintenance of aircraft, training centers that prevents the outflow of capital to train crew, we will strengthen the industry. As we strengthen the industry, it will make us globally competitive.
I'm sorry to ask the question, but why is this not being done?
I think that's the million-dollar question. We know in Nigeria many things solutions have been preferred for a number of things, but they aren't getting done because we're not addressing issues from that table. We're addressing issues from a completely different point of view.
All right, so this will also lead me, since we're talking about the airline industry, yes, this will also lead me to concessions of the airport that has been on for a while.
Yes.
I thought they were pre-existing deals with by Courtney and the likes.
Yes.
So why are we going this route again?
Again, you asked the question, the obvious. We do, let's go back. If we have a national airline in 2021, what will happen in 2023 when there's a new government, if there's a new government? If we had concessions many years ago, there were issues. The issues, even by Courtney is facing many challenges on the terms of the agreement we made with the government. And so, if you look at whether it is the concession issue or we look at the BASA issue, the problem is how we negotiate these deals. The airport concession problem will face legal hurdles along the way because of the agreements that were done prior, some in the national interest, some counter to the national interest. So this concession, again, will face legal challenges and will also face the obvious uncertainties of a change in government in about 2 years.
So it's the Nigerian problem.
Yeah, we call it the Nigerian factor.
That keeps going back and forth.
Absolutely.
Then what can we learn from the Ethiopian airline model? I mean, it's quite shocking that we now have to go to Ethiopia to be able to learn a model.
Right.
When you look at the fact that Nigerian Airways used to be strong and was way back the 60s and it was a very strong airline. And 61, 62, 63, when it was morphed into Nigerian Airlines for what it used to be before, it was around that same time, I think it was 59 or 60, that Embraer started. And today, Embraer is the third, fourth largest producer of aircrafts in the world. So what can we learn from the Ethiopian model? Now, when are we going to have our own sort of like Embraer?
Well, one of the things with Nigeria is that we copy and we paste. But in copying, you must localize. The Ethiopian model is very simple. The government put money behind an airline. And let's not deceive ourselves. The government does subsidize that airline. They don't state that figure publicly. But what we should learn is the basics. The airline business, that's why the government is going with or presenting the story of our only own 5%. The idea behind it is that the government puts capital behind the airline. We're going back to the issue of capital and allows it to be run as an independent entity, not a ministry or an agency. And that is really what makes Ethiopian effective. And so what we need in the Nigerian airspace is government support for the airline industry, again, through capital, as I said, even through equipment, and then proper governance processes through a proper structured governance process. So through public company structures, for example, or a quasi-government agency that is independent, not like NMPC, but truly independent, that is run. That is what Ethiopian is doing. There's no magic to what Ethiopian has done. And beyond that, Ethiopian is looking beyond the Ethiopian market and creating all these airlines like ASCAI, joint ventures in other markets to dominate those markets, essentially to dominate the region. And why is that? We are also moving to the African Continental Free Trade Area where there are no market barriers, there's freedom. So whoever positions now will take advantage of that in the future. So that's forward-looking. We're still dealing with the basics rather than projecting forward and planning for that future date when we'll have an African market. Even these issues of bans, we ban you, we don't ban you, you can go here, you can't go there, should also force us to look inward and accelerate the African free trade area, accelerate that process so that we can trade between ourselves more effectively. Where our regional trade is only 15% or less. And so the question becomes, if we expand that, would we be worried about whether we are banned from going to Europe? How many Europeans actually come to Africa? Let's be realistic about it. What percentage of Americans come to Africa? Meanwhile, we are the nerve center of economic activity around the world. So that movement is not necessary into those regions. We need to focus on, maybe these bans are a call for us to focus more on developing the region as a trading bloc. And by positioning the airline industry early on and looking forward into the future, we'll be able to take advantage. At the way that we're going and the way we're moving, we're just going to be spectators in the continental free trade area.
All right. I want to just also take you to competitive pricing.
Yes.
Could it be part of the things we'll negotiate after this ban takes effect? Because when you look at it, relative pricing for airlines like British Airways in Nigeria compared to some other African countries, it's a big killing out of Nigeria. You know, and we have increasingly seen some Nigerians take the option of going to fly from other countries, like as close as Benin Republic.
Correct.
To be able to catch flights.
Yes.
So is that part of the thing we should negotiate? Because when you look at it, relative, for instance, a first-class ticket or a business-class ticket in Nigeria is one of the highest on the African continent in terms of
demand and supply. Basically, we do not regulate airfares. We leave that to free market forces. And Nigerians will pay any fares. We've known, look, business class has gone from 2 million to 5 million on some carriers, and there's no elasticity. You would say, oh, at this breaking point, Nigerians will no longer travel, or the load factors will drop. No, if it's 10 million, Nigerians will still fill up the airplanes. You know, British Airways is known as an airline that fills front to back, whereas everywhere else in the world, you fill the economy section first before you start to fill the business class and first class section. But Nigeria, British Airways fills first class, then when there's no more space, it spills over to business class. And some people are giving premium economy and then giving a reward to fly business at a future date. We basically operate a free market system in the aviation industry. Prices are not determined by regulation. But if we have effective Nigerian airlines that can provide the succor that Nigerians are seeking for with relation to prices, which is again why we must support and grow the domestic market, not just to bring the money home, but we can also affect prices. If you look at Ghana, for example, Ghana tends to take more of a fifth freedom market. Anybody can come, anybody can go. You can transit through here. We tend to be more restrictive, whereas the airlines are saying, let's restrict all the airlines to one airport so that the domestic airlines have some opportunities available to them. And so we have to look at what is in the best interest of the nation. We need to create and support these airlines so that we fly more and determine the prices. It's not determined by London or Paris or Addis Ababa and Nairobi. That's the reason why we must support and domesticate opportunities within our own market.
All right. So, okay. I just wanted to ask this again.
Yes.
You've talked about the pricing. Then, in every negotiation, there must be an end game.
Yes.
If the ban takes effect on Tuesday, then what should be the bullet points for the end game when we start to thaw back the ban? Because it must achieve something, because it will be counterproductive if after the ban we can't get some strong concessions. Take, for instance, we can't even use this COVID ban as a launchpad to review BASA with the UK. We can't use it as a launchpad, to review many other things and to be able to scale up our airlines to be able to compete effectively.
First of all, what was the end game for the ban? What was our intention when we chose to go into the ban? However, like you said, maybe the ban will give us the opportunity to go revisit these issues and go back and say, well, you know, we don't like the original agreement we have. We're going to tear it up and we're going to sign a new agreement that is. And as long as we present it as being fair to all parties, okay? And clearly, it is not fair that in the case of the UAE, they have 21 flights coming into Nigeria, and we only have 3, and we're still struggling to get even those 3. And so it forms a basis on the same principle of friendliness, cooperativeness, brotherliness, etc. All of those diplomatic language that is used at us can be redirected to say we need to balance this game because it's only fair as brothers, as friends, as the Committee of Nations to do what is right for everybody. Just like we talk about bans. Why are we against bans? We're simply against bans because they restrict opportunities. We're even against the idea of visas, you know, even within the African continent. Why should I go to Angola with a visa? We're supposed to be brothers. We're supposed to be Africans. And so we can take advantage, which is what everybody else has done with COVID, is to say on the basis of COVID, we think that this is the best interest of all people. And we can take that approach to revisit everything on the table to say, you know, clearly you can see that this is not fair. And we need to be fair to each other. And being fair to each other requires us to do things in a much different way. So you take, out of 24, you take 12, I take 12. Isn't that fair? You know, in every negotiation, it has to be win-win. It can't be about you win, I lose. That's war. So the idea should be win-win. So on the basis of 24, you take 12, you take 12, I take 12. Okay, maybe I can't do my 12, and we'll find a way for it to swing back to your balance, but I'll gain something for that. And that's basically the principle. So we don't just ban for the sake of banning. We don't just do for the sake of doing because we have to undo. And at the end of the day, you don't want to do something and come out looking silly at the end of it. So obviously, the COVID presents many opportunities. Beyond banning, it presents opportunities for us to revisit a lot of things that have been unfair to us in the process.
So now is the time to put on our negotiation caps. You've talked about 12-12 now for the UAE. What would you say should be the approach to deal with countries like the UK? I wouldn't really say a lot of Canada because we don't have direct flights all the way to Canada. It has to be transited through another channel. But the UK, for instance, that will have direct flights to, what deal should we put on the table now?
Again, we can have direct flights to Canada, if the numbers make sense. If we expand, if we support our local industry and expand our local industry strategically, we do roadmaps. And in these roadmaps, one of the things should be, how do we grow our presence so that, look, 20% of everybody going to Dubai is going to Dubai. The rest are going someplace else, which means that those are people that we could have taken to those places ourselves. So if we support and develop our own local industry to go to all these places, considering the constraints that exist, then obviously we will position ourselves not just to negotiate for the UK, we can negotiate for South America, which has been calling for deepening relationships with us, the Caribbean region, the UK. So the agreement with the UK remains. You have three flights, 3 operations into the UK, or we have 3 operations into Nigeria. How do we as Nigerians, look, they are not the ones stopping us from coming to the UK technically, you know, on paper, it's fair. We have to expand our capacity to take advantage of the agreements that we enter into. So what we should be thinking about is how do we build our domestic market to take advantage of those opportunities that are available to us that we've agreed to participate in.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you for your time. It's been great talking to you this morning.